They say a mother's love is blind. They say we see our children through rose-colored glasses, unable to accept their flaws. But what happens when those flaws aren't just teenage rebellion or bad grades? What happens when the whispers about your son become too loud to ignore? My name is Dorothy Williams. I'm 60 years old, and I raised what I thought was a good man. But sometimes the people we love most are masters of deception. If you want to hear more shocking family stories that will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload, because what I discovered about my son will change everything. I should have paid attention to the whispers sooner. But when you've raised a child from birth, when you've sacrificed everything to give them opportunities you never had, it's hard to believe that strangers might see something you've missed. My son Marcus was my pride and joy, a successful 32-year-old attorney with his own practice, married to a beautiful woman named Stephanie, living in a house I could have only dreamed of when I was raising him alone in Oakland. I was 28 when Marcus was born, a single mother working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. His father had disappeared before Marcus took his first steps, leaving me to navigate parenthood alone. Those early years were hard, so hard that sometimes I didn't know how we'd make it through another month, but Marcus was my motivation. Every double shift I worked, every night I fell asleep exhausted on the couch, every sacrifice I made was for him, and it seemed to pay off. Marcus excelled in school, earned a full scholarship to UC Berkeley, and graduated from law school with honors. When he opened his own firm specializing in family law, I thought I had done everything right. My baby had broken the cycle of poverty and made something of himself. The first whisper came from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, about 6 months ago. She pulled me aside after church one Sunday morning, her face filled with concern. "Dorothy, I don't want to speak out of turn," she said carefully. "But I heard something about Marcus that worried me." "What kind of something?" I asked, immediately defensive. "My daughter works at the courthouse downtown. She mentioned seeing Marcus there frequently, but not for the reasons you'd expect. There were some concerns about his behavior with female clients." I felt my back stiffen. "Mrs. Chen, courthouse gossip isn't something I put much stock in. Marcus is a professional." She nodded quickly, but I could see she wasn't convinced. "Of course, dear. I just thought you should know people are talking." I dismissed it immediately. Marcus had always been charming with women. That was just his personality. He was handsome, successful, and confident. Of course, people would notice him. I figured it was just jealousy or misunderstanding. The second whisper came from my hairdresser, Denise, 2 weeks later. She'd been doing my hair for 15 years, and we'd developed the kind of relationship where she felt comfortable sharing neighborhood gossip. "Girl, you know I don't like to repeat rumors," she said while touching up my roots. "But I heard something about your Marcus that didn't sit right with me." "What now?" I sighed. "My cousin works at that fancy restaurant downtown. You know, the one with the white tablecloths. She said Marcus comes in there regular-like, but always with different women. And honey, none of them look like his wife." My hands tightened in my lap. "Marcus has business dinners, Denise. That's normal for attorneys." "Business dinners where the man's got his hand on the woman's thigh under the table?" she asked pointedly. I stared at her reflection in the mirror. "That's a serious accusation." "I'm not accusing nothing," Denise said quickly. "I'm just telling you what my cousin saw, multiple times." That night, I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey, Mama, how are you doing?" "I'm fine, baby. How's Stephanie?" "She's good. Working late again. Tonight, you know how demanding her job is." Stephanie was a marketing executive at a tech company, and she did work long hours. But something about the way Marcus said it made me pause. "Marcus, honey, are you and Stephanie doing okay?" "Marriage-wise, I mean." There was a brief silence. "Of course we are. Why would you ask that?" "No reason. Just checking in on my favorite son." He laughed. "I'm your only son, Mama." That's what makes you my favorite. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the photos on my refrigerator. Pictures of Marcus graduating law school, Marcus and Stephanie's wedding, Marcus receiving an award from the local bar association. In every photo, he looked like the successful, honorable man I'd raised him to be. But the whispers had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. The whispers didn't stop. Over the next month, they seemed to multiply like weeds after rain. It started to feel like everywhere I went in our community, someone had something to say about Marcus that made my stomach twist into knots. At the grocery store, the cashier mentioned seeing Marcus at a hotel bar with a woman who definitely wasn't his wife. At my book club, one of the ladies said her daughter had worked as a paralegal at Marcus's firm briefly and quit after feeling uncomfortable with his behavior. Even my pastor's wife pulled me aside after service to gently suggest that I might want to have a conversation with my son about appropriate professional boundaries. Each time I defended Marcus. I explained away every story, every concern, every uncomfortable observation. He was networking. He was building his practice. He was being friendly and professional. These people didn't understand how the legal world worked, but privately, I was starting to pay attention in ways I hadn't before. When Marcus called me, I listened more carefully to what he said and didn't say. When I saw him at family gatherings, I watched how he interacted with women, including his own wife. The first thing I noticed was how Stephanie had changed. She'd always been vibrant and talkative, full of stories about her work and plans for the future. But lately, she seemed quieter, more withdrawn. At Marcus's birthday dinner last month, she barely spoke unless someone asked her a direct question. When she did speak, she kept glancing at Marcus as if seeking permission. I also noticed that Marcus had become increasingly controlling about their social calendar. He would interrupt Stephanie when she was talking, redirect conversations away from topics he didn't like, and make decisions for both of them without consulting her. I'd raised Marcus to respect women. I was a strong, independent single mother who had taught him that women were equals. Where had this behavior come from? The breaking point came during a family barbecue at my house. Marcus and Stephanie arrived together, but something felt off immediately. Stephanie had a small bruise on her upper arm that she kept trying to hide with her sleeve. When I asked her about it, she said she'd bumped into a door at work. "You need to be more careful, baby," Marcus said, putting his arm around her in what looked like a loving gesture, but felt possessive. Stephanie's always been clumsy. The way he said it, dismissive and slightly mocking, made me flinch. That wasn't how a loving husband spoke about his wife's minor injury. Later that evening, while Marcus was outside grilling, I found Stephanie sitting alone in my kitchen, staring at her phone. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked up quickly, almost startled. "Oh, yes, everything's fine." But her eyes told a different story. They looked tired, wary, like someone who was constantly walking on eggshells. "Stephanie, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? I may be Marcus's mother, but I care about you too." For a moment, her composure cracked. I saw something flash across her face. Fear, maybe, or desperation. But then Marcus walked back into the kitchen, and her expression immediately shifted, back to neutral. "What are you ladies talking about?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. "Just girl talk," Stephanie said quickly. That night after they left, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that bruise on Stephanie's arm, the way she'd looked at me in the kitchen, the subtle ways Marcus had controlled every interaction throughout the evening. I thought about all the whispers, all the concerns people had shared. With me, all the signs I'd been ignoring. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called in sick to my job at the community center and drove downtown to see for myself what Marcus was really doing at his law office. If the rumors were just gossip, I'd put them to rest once and for all. If they weren't, I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might discover about my son. I parked across the street from Marcus's law office at 8:30 a.m., feeling ridiculous and guilty at the same time. What kind of mother spies on her own son? But the whispers had become too persistent to ignore, and something about Stephanie's behavior at the barbecue had set off every maternal alarm bell I had. Marcus's office was in a renovated Victorian house in the downtown district, painted a professional gray with brass nameplate that read, Marcus Williams, attorney at law. I'd been so proud when he'd bought this building 3 years ago. It represented everything we'd worked toward: success, respectability, achievement. Watched as Marcus arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, just like always. He looked handsome and professional in his navy suit, carrying his leather briefcase with the confidence of a man who owned the world. My heart swelled with pride despite my suspicions. This was my son, the boy I'd raised to be better than the circumstances we'd come from. For the first 2 hours, everything seemed normal. Marcus went inside. Lights came on in his office, and I saw him through the window sitting at his desk, presumably working. A few clients came and went. An elderly man, a middle-aged woman, a young couple who looked nervous and spoke in hushed tones. Then, at 11:30 a.m., everything changed. A young woman arrived alone. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long, dark hair and wearing a dress that seemed inappropriate for a business meeting. She looked nervous as she approached the building, checking her phone multiple times before knocking on the door. Marcus answered personally, which struck me as odd since he had a receptionist, but what really caught my attention was how he greeted her. It wasn't the professional handshake and welcoming smile he'd given his other clients. Instead, he placed his hand on the small of her back and guided her inside with an intimacy that made my stomach turn. I waited, watching the windows. The blinds in Marcus's office were closed, but I could see shadows moving around inside. After about 30 minutes, the shadows moved closer together. Then they disappeared entirely, as if both people had moved away from the window area. The dumb young woman didn't leave until 1:15 p.m., nearly 2 hours after she'd arrived. When she finally emerged, her hair was disheveled, her lipstick was gone, and she was adjusting her dress. She looked around nervously before hurrying to her car and driving away quickly. Marcus appeared in the window a few minutes later, straightening his tie and smoothing down his hair. The sight made me physically ill, but I needed to be sure. One incident could be explained away, rationalized, dismissed. I needed to see if this was a pattern. So I came back the next day, and the day after. That what I discovered over the course of a week made me question everything I thought I knew about my son. Marcus had a steady stream of female clients, but not all of them seemed to be there for legal services. Young women would arrive looking professional and leave looking disheveled. Some stayed for hours. Others left quickly, looking upset or uncomfortable. On Thursday, I saw something that broke my heart completely. A woman who looked to be in her early 30s arrived with what appeared to be divorce papers. She was crying when she went in, clearly vulnerable and desperate for help. She was in Marcus's office for over 2 hours. When she came out, she wasn't crying anymore, but she looked broken. She moved like someone in shock, mechanically walking to her car without really seeing where she was going. Before she drove away, I saw her check her appearance in her rearview mirror and start crying again. That evening, I sat in my car outside Marcus's office long after he'd left, trying to process what I'd witnessed. This wasn't networking or friendly professionalism. This was predatory behavior. My son was taking advantage of vulnerable women who came to him for help. The boy I'd raised to respect women was using his position of power to exploit them. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except what I'd seen outside, Marcus's office. For 3 days I wrestled with denial, anger, and heartbreak. How could the child I devoted my life to raising have become someone who preyed on vulnerable women? But I needed more than just suspicious observations. I needed proof. and I needed to understand the full scope of what Marcus was doing. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. James Morrison was a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. He was a black man in his 50s with kind eyes and a serious demeanor who came highly recommended by a friend whose husband had been cheating. When I met him at a coffee shop downtown, I felt both shame and determination. "Mrs. Williams," he said after I'd explained the situation, "I want you to understand that hiring me might uncover things you're not prepared to hear. Are you sure you want to proceed?" "Mr. Morrison, I raised that boy to be better than this. If he's hurting people, I need to know. And if he is, I need to figure out how to stop it." He nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. Too many mothers enable their sons' bad behavior by refusing to see it. It takes courage to seek the truth." Morrison worked for 2 weeks, using surveillance equipment and connections I couldn't have imagined. What he uncovered was worse than my worst fears. Marcus wasn't just having affairs. He was systematically manipulating and coercing female clients. Morrison documented at least 12 different women over a 2-week period who showed signs of distress after meeting with Marcus. He also discovered that Marcus had been reported to the State Bar Association twice in the past year for inappropriate conduct, but both complaints had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. The most damning evidence came from Morrison's audio recordings. Using legal surveillance techniques, he'd captured conversations between Marcus and his receptionist, a young woman named Amanda who clearly knew what was happening, but was too afraid to speak up. "Another divorce client this afternoon," I heard Marcus say on one recording. "Young, desperate, probably hasn't been touched by a man in months. These cases are almost too easy." "Mr. Williams, I don't think we should be talking about clients like that," Amanda replied nervously. "Relax, Amanda. I'm just saying these women need comfort, and I'm providing a service. They're grateful for the personal attention." "But sir, what if someone reports? Who's going to believe them? I'm a respected attorney with an impeccable reputation. They're emotional, unstable women going through messy divorces. My word against theirs." Listening to those recordings, I barely recognized my son's voice. The warmth, the respect, the kindness I'd taught him, none of it was there. Instead, I heard a cold, calculating predator who saw vulnerable women as opportunities to exploit. Morrison also uncovered financial irregularities. Marcus was charging some female clients significantly less than his standard rates, sometimes accepting alternative payment arrangements that weren't documented in his official billing records. The implications made me sick. "Mrs. Williams," Morrison said when he presented his findings, "your son is engaging in what legal experts would classify as sexual coercion and abuse of power. He's using his position as an attorney to manipulate women who are in crisis. This isn't just unethical. In many cases, it's criminal." I sat in my living room that night, staring at the folder of evidence Morrison had given me. Photos, audio recordings, witness statements, financial records. It was all there in black and white. My son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, was a predator. But the most heartbreaking revelation was yet to come. As I read through Morrison's report more carefully, I found a section that made my blood run cold. Stephanie, Marcus's wife, wasn't just a victim of his emotional manipulation at home, she was also his first victim. According to Morrison's research, Stephanie had originally been Marcus's client during her divorce from her first husband. That's how they'd met, how their relationship had started. My son had been preying on vulnerable women for years, and it all began with the woman who was now his wife. I had to see Stephanie, not as Marcus's mother making a social visit, but as a woman who finally understood what another woman was going through. I called her at work and asked if she could meet me for coffee, telling her I wanted to talk about something important. We met at a small cafe on the other side of town, away from Marcus's office and their usual haunts. Stephanie arrived looking nervous, constantly checking her phone and glancing around as if she expected Marcus to appear at any moment. "Dorothy, "Is everything okay?" she asked as we settled into a corner booth. "When you called, you sounded different." I looked at this beautiful young woman. She was only 29, 3 years younger than Marcus, and saw the fear in her eyes that I'd been blind to before. She was thin, thinner than she'd been when they married 2 years ago. And there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't completely hide. "Stephanie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How did you and Marcus really meet?" Her face went pale. What do you mean?" "You know how we met. Through mutual friends." "That's what Marcus told me, but I've reason to believe that's not true." I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "Stephanie, I know you were his client before you were his wife." She started crying immediately, not the gentle tears of sadness but the harsh sobs of someone whose secret had finally been exposed. Other customers in the cafe turned to look, but I didn't care. I moved to sit beside her, putting my arm around her shoulders. "How did you find out?" she whispered between sobs. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know, and I want to help you." For the next hour, Stephanie told me a story that broke my heart and filled me with rage. She'd gone to Marcus for help with her divorce from an abusive husband. She'd been vulnerable, scared, and desperate for someone to protect her. Marcus had presented himself as her savior, offering to take her case for reduced fees and providing emotional support during the most difficult time of her life. "At first it felt like he really cared about me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He would stay late to work on my case, listen to me cry about my marriage, tell me I deserved better. I was so grateful to have someone in my corner." "When did things change?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Gradually. He started suggesting that I stay after hours to discuss my case. Then he said he was worried about my emotional state and thought I needed comfort. He convinced me that what happened between us was healing, that it was what I needed to move forward." My heart ached for her. Marcus had groomed her, just like he was grooming his current clients. He'd taken a woman fleeing one abusive relationship and pulled her directly into another. "Why did you marry him?" I asked gently. "Because I thought I loved him, and because—" She paused, looking ashamed. "Because he said if I didn't, he'd have to charge me full price for the divorce proceedings, and I couldn't afford it. I'd already moved in with him by then. I didn't have anywhere else to go." The manipulation was so calculated, so cruel, that I felt physically sick. Marcus had essentially blackmailed a vulnerable woman into marriage. "Stephanie, what's he doing to you now?" She told me about the emotional abuse, the control, the way he monitored her every move. How he criticized her appearance, her intelligence, her work. How he made her feel grateful for his attention while simultaneously making her feel worthless. How he used her financial dependence on him to keep her trapped. "And the other women?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "I know about them," she said quietly. "He doesn't try to hide it anymore. He says it's just business, just part of providing full service to his clients. He says if I have a problem with it, I can leave. But we both know I can't afford to." "Why? Can't you leave?" "Because he's a lawyer, Dorothy. He knows the system. He's told me exactly what would happen if I tried to divorce him. He'd represent himself, drag out the proceedings, bankrupt me with legal fees, and make sure I got nothing. He's shown me cases where he's done exactly that to other women." I realized then that Stephanie wasn't just Marcus's wife. She was his prisoner. After my conversation with Stephanie, I couldn't pretend anymore. The son I'd raised, the man I'd been proud of, was a predator who was destroying lives. But confronting him directly felt impossible. How do you tell your child that you know they've become a monster? I decided to start with something smaller, something that might make him realize I was paying attention. I called him and asked if we could have dinner. Just the two of us, like we used to when he was younger. We met at his favorite restaurant, an upscale steakhouse where he liked to show off his success. Marcus arrived looking confident and relaxed, kissing my cheek and pulling out my chair like the gentleman I'd taught him to be. The contradiction between his public manners and his private actions made my stomach turn. "You look beautiful, Mama," he said, settling into his seat. "I'm glad you called. We don't get enough one-on-one time." "I've been thinking about that too," I said carefully. "I feel like I don't really know what's going on in your life anymore." "What do you mean? You know everything important. Work's good, Stephanie's good. We're thinking about buying a bigger house next year." "How is work, really? I hear you're taking on a lot of divorce cases." Something flickered in his eyes, but his smile didn't waver. "Word travels fast. Yes, divorce law is lucrative. Lots of unhappy marriages out there. Must be difficult, dealing with all those emotional clients." "It has its challenges," he said, cutting into his steak. "But I'm good at what I do. I provide excellent service." The way he said excellent service made my skin crawl. I thought about the young woman I'd seen leaving his office disheveled, about Stephanie's tears, about all the whispers I'd finally started believing. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." He looked up, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Of course, Mama. What is it?" "Are you faithful to Stephanie?" The question hung in the air between us. Marcus set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "That's an interesting question," he said slowly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because people are talking, Marcus, and because I care about both you and Stephanie." "What kind of people? What are they saying?" I could see him shifting into lawyer mode, deflecting and gathering information instead of answering my question. "They're saying you're seen around town with women who aren't your wife. They're saying there are concerns about your professional conduct." Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "Mama, I'm a successful Black attorney in a predominantly white profession. Of course people are going to talk. They're looking for reasons to tear me down. This isn't about race, Marcus, and you know it. Isn't it?" His voice hardened. "You think it's a coincidence that these rumors started circulating right after I won that big settlement against the city? You think it's random that suddenly my professional conduct is being questioned?" I stared at my son, watching him turn himself into the victim in a situation where he was clearly the predator. It was masterful manipulation, and I realized he'd probably used similar tactics on his clients and his wife. "Marcus, I'm not asking about rumors. I'm asking you directly. Are you faithful to your wife?" He met my eyes steadily. "Of course I am. Mama, I love Stephanie." It was a lie. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, feel it in the way he delivered the words just a little too smoothly. My son looked me in the face and lied to me without hesitation. "And your female clients? Are you maintaining appropriate professional boundaries?" "Absolutely. I'm disappointed that you'd even ask such a question." Another lie, delivered with just the right amount of hurt indignation. I realized in that moment that Marcus wasn't just a predator. He was a sociopath. He felt no guilt, no remorse, no genuine emotion about what he was doing to these women. And he had no intention of stopping. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by James Morrison's evidence files, Stephanie's tearful confessions echoing in my mind, and Marcus's lies still fresh in my memory. I was 60 years old, and I'd spent 32 years of my life raising what I thought was a good man. But the evidence was overwhelming. My son was a predator, and every day I stayed silent was another day he could hurt someone. I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first call was to the State Bar Association. I'd researched the process and learned that they had a confidential hotline for reporting attorney misconduct. When the intake specialist answered, I took a deep breath and said the words I never thought I'd say about my own child. I need to report an attorney for sexual misconduct with clients. Ma'am, I need to inform you that this call is being recorded. Can you provide the attorney's name and bar number? Marcus Williams, I said, my voice steady despite my breaking heart. I don't know his bar number, but he practices family law in Oakland. I provided them with James Morrison's contact information, explaining that I'd hired a private investigator and had documentation of Marcus's behavior. The specialist was professional but thorough, asking detailed questions about the evidence and the timeline of incidents. Mrs. Williams, I need to ask, what is your relationship to the attorney in question? He's my son. There was a pause. Ma'am, are you certain you want to proceed with this complaint? Once we begin an investigation, the process is formal and could result in serious consequences for the attorney's career. I'm certain. The women he's hurting deserve protection, even if it means destroying my relationship with my son. My second call was to Stephanie. She was at work, and I could hear the confusion in her voice when I asked her to meet me that evening. Dorothy, what's this about? You're scaring me. I know everything, Stephanie. About how you really met Marcus, about what he's still doing to other women, and I want to help you get away from him. She started crying again, but this time there was relief mixed with the tears. I can't afford to leave him. I've tried to figure out a way, but I have some money saved up. Not a lot, but enough to help you get started. And I know a good attorney who specializes in helping abuse victims, someone Marcus can't intimidate or outmaneuver. Why would you help me? He's your son. Because you're a victim, and because I failed to protect you when I should have seen what was happening. I can't undo that, but I can help you now. My third call was the hardest one. I called Marcus. Hey, Mama. I was just thinking about you. Thanks for dinner last night. Marcus, I need you to come over, tonight. There's something we need to discuss. Can't it wait? I have a late client meeting. No, it can't wait. And cancel your client meeting. This is more important. He must have heard something in my tone because he agreed immediately. When Marcus arrived at my house an hour later, I was ready for him. I'd laid out some of Morrison's evidence on my kitchen table. Photos, financial records, transcripts of recordings. I wanted him to see that I knew everything. He walked into the kitchen, saw the papers, and stopped dead in his tracks. Mama, what is this? This is the truth about what you've been doing to those women, about what you did to Stephanie, about who you really are. His expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, anger, calculation. Finally, he settled on the wounded son routine. I can't believe you hired someone to spy on me. Your own son. I can't believe I raised someone who preys on vulnerable women. We all have our disappointments. He picked up one of the photos, the image of him with his hand on a young client's back, guiding her into his office with obvious intimacy. This proves nothing, he said. I'm friendly with my clients. That's good customer service. Marcus, stop lying to me. I know what you are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Marcus stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table for a long moment, and I watched his face cycle through different strategies. First, he tried charm, that boyish smile that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. When that didn't work, he shifted to anger, accusing me of betraying him and believing strangers over my own blood. Finally, he tried manipulation, painting himself as a victim of racism and jealousy. None of it worked. I'd heard these same tactics in Morrison's recordings, seen how Marcus used them to control and confuse his victims. But I wasn't a vulnerable client seeking help. I was his mother, and I knew him better than anyone. The state. Bar Association will begin their investigation next week, I told him calmly. You're going to lose your license, Marcus. The only question is whether you face criminal charges too. You can't do this to me, he said, his mask finally slipping. I'm your son. Everything I am, everything I've achieved is because of what you taught me. I taught you to respect women, to use your education to help people, to be better than the circumstances we came from. You twisted those lessons into something ugly. Those women came to me willingly. I never forced anyone to do anything. You used their desperation against them. You took advantage of women who were vulnerable and scared. That's not consent, Marcus. That's coercion. He swept the papers off the table in a burst of rage. You don't understand what it's like being a black man in this profession. I have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. If I can find some comfort and companionship along the way, what's wrong with that? Everything is wrong with that when the companionship involves exploiting clients who trust you to help them. Marcus left that night in fury, and I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. When I finally did, it was through his attorney. He was suing me for defamation and harassment. The irony of my son using the legal system to intimidate me wasn't lost on anyone. But the state bar investigation moved forward. More women came forward with complaints once word spread that someone was finally taking Marcus's misconduct seriously. The evidence Morrison had gathered became part of a larger pattern that the Bar Association couldn't ignore. Stephanie filed for divorce with the attorney I'd connected her with, a woman who specialized in representing abuse victims and who worked pro bono for cases involving attorney misconduct. Marcus tried every intimidation tactic in his playbook, but his reputation was already in ruins. The divorce was finalized in 4 months, with Stephanie receiving spousal support and keeping the house. 6 months after I first called the Bar Association, Marcus was disbarred. He was also charged with 3 counts of sexual coercion and 1 count of fraud related to his billing practices. The trial was covered extensively in the local media, and the details that emerged painted a picture of systematic abuse that had been going on for years. During the trial, I sat in the courtroom every day, watching my son face the consequences of his choices. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I owed it to his victims to be there, to show that not everyone in his family would protect him from accountability. Marcus was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. He still maintains his innocence, claiming he's the victim of a racist justice system and a vindictive mother who betrayed her own son. Today, 18 months later, I work as a volunteer with an organization that helps women leave abusive relationships. I share my story, how a mother's love can become willful blindness, how good intentions can enable terrible behavior, how sometimes the people we love most are the ones we need to hold accountable. Stephanie has rebuilt her life. She has a new job, new friends, and for the first time in years, she seems genuinely happy. We stay in touch, and she tells me often that my decision to investigate Marcus saved her life. The hardest part isn't the loss of my son. It's accepting that the son I thought I knew never really existed. The Marcus I loved was a carefully constructed facade designed to hide a predator. But by refusing to protect that facade any longer, I helped ensure that no other woman would fall victim to his manipulation. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means choosing strangers over family. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable the person you love to keep hurting others. If you've ever had to make the impossible choice between protecting someone you love and protecting their victims, share your story in the comments. Your courage might help someone else find the strength to do what's right.